We're going to go old school here with the busy morning for the Grand Traverse County Commissioners. Several projects did receive support and the green light to move forward. So let's just come right in here, Beth. You had this story. This story came out when? A couple days ago?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
On the 24th, March 24th.
I'm like, what is time? What are dates? So let's start with VASA. What's happening with VASA?
Yeah, so what the county commissioners did was essentially support two different kinds of grant applications at their most recent meeting. The first one was for the VASA. The commission agreed to commit $300,000 in county capital improvement funds. Tart Trails is contributing another $100,000. So that combined $400,000 would provide a local match to a grant application to the state this year. If successful, that combined $800,000 in funding would pay for some pretty significant upgrades to the Trailhead Park, which is off Bartlett Road in Williamsburg. So the county, the last year or two, Parks and Recreation has been going through a process to get an updated design for that Trailhead Park. Tart Trails has been helping that financially, doing some engineering studies. And essentially, this is the second most used park in Grand Traverse County after the Civic Center
I didn't know that.
in terms of users on a weekly basis. It's also a really important year-round park. So, obviously some of our parks, like our beaches, are seeing more in the summer, or ski parks may see more in the winter. This park is really used year-round, cross-country skiing, biking, but it hasn't, in its many decades in existence, not received much love and care.
Okay.
There have been some recent improvements to the park that one of the local bike associations made, but other than that, it's really in need of some improvements. The driveway, the parking area of it often floods because of the sloping of it. It's kind of, you go there certain days, especially busy days, it's just a mishmash of cars parking every which way because they're not like...
It's like gravel.
It's gravel. It's not like designated parking spaces. So they'd be redoing the parking lot, redoing the driveway, redoing the warming hut area, which right now doesn't really function much like a warming hut. People don't linger there. You kind of just move past and go into the park. But this would upgrade that, so there's fire pits. It's warm. It's a place to hang out and socialize and build community.
Yeah.
And then have a new entry into the trail system. So they're hopeful. Commissioners did support the grant application again with that match. So we will learn later this year, usually December is when the state makes its decisions on the grant funding. And when you have a strong local match like that, especially, that can help you score better in the state grant applications. So if that is successful, that project would move forward as soon as the snow thaws next year.
Very cool. So that's one green light. I like that. AcenTek also receiving the green light to apply for broadband funding. Can you remind us, what is AcenTek?
Sure.
And what does this mean for Grand Traverse County?
So they're a telecommunications company, a fiber internet company, and Michigan recently has been allocated over $1.5 billion in funding for what's called the BEAD program. That stands for Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment. So Michigan received the fourth largest funding allocation in the nation to essentially boost our fiber internet and broadband capabilities. And so there's this pile of money that is sitting there that communities are now applying for, and private companies are applying for grants to expand, for example, fiber internet.
Okay.
So AcenTek wanted to expand more into rural communities. We're talking about areas like Buckley, Mesick, Kokomish, South Boardman, Hoxseyville. To apply for these grants, they need letters of support from any county that they're going to be expanding into.
Okay.
So they got that support from our Grand Traverse County Commission. About 300 of the planned areas, locations that they're going to expand would be in Grand Traverse County. It's often very expensive to expand into rural areas. You need it's easier in urban cores like Traverse City Light and Power doing their fiber deployment because you have the population density using the service to kind of help pay off the debt. In rural areas, that's more challenging. That's part of what this grant program is for, is providing that funding assistance that would incentivize private companies to expand into those communities.
Lots of the rural areas don't even have the option for fiber at this point, right? So, this could be a huge win for some of those rural areas.
Yes, and, it's important to note that the county's support of AcenTek's application, there's no funding commitment from Grand Traverse County. It would be paid for in a combination of state and AcenTek funding, and also other providers could come and ask for for the same
Sure.
support for the commission for their grant application. So it's not exclusive. It doesn't prohibit any competition, and it doesn't commit the county to funding. It just says, yes, we'd like to see this
Yeah.
rural come to our area if you want to give AcenTek money to do that.
Right. So essentially, the commissioners have to approve whether or not they want them to apply for this funding.
Yeah, it's essentially just a letter of support.
Perfect. Love that. By the way, though, anytime you have more competition for broadband or fiber, good thing.
From a consumer standpoint, it definitely tends to be a good thing.
I'm on board with that one. I love that. We also had a story here. This was for Brownfield funding. It was approved for a local development, the Oak Shore Commons, which sounds so cool. Like, I want to say that I live at the Oak Shore Commons. I feel like I need to be drinking tea.
I feel like there's a lot of apartment complexes that have fancy names.
Really
now
fancy.
in Traverse City.
Where do you live? Oak Shore Commons. Well then. What is happening with that?
Sure. So when we're talking about Oak Shore Commons, we're talking about the former Kmart property out in Acme, where I'm sure many people have seen a lot of growth. The former Toms and Kmart there have been redeveloped into a commercial center and also into an apartment complex. The existing apartments that are at Oak Shore Commons right now are market rate. They're just normal, apartments on the market. But the next phase of housing that's being supported with this Brownfield plan would be income restricted or workforce housing. So there were recent legislative changes in Michigan that allow Brownfield funding, which historically has supported things like environmental cleanup. It helps cover a developer's costs so that they'll tackle a troubled property.
Sure.
In this case, Brownfield funding can now also be applied to workforce housing, because what the state is essentially doing is saying, we'll give you kind of a tax bonus here to sell or to rent your apartments out at a rate lower than market rate. We know you could make more money doing market rate. So if you do these income restricted apartments, you can apply for this TIF rebate.
So it's a rebate. It's money on the back end.
Right, correct. So the thinking here is, it's capturing taxes on the property value as it rises over time. So the existing taxes that the township or the county gets, whatever, those are still there. We're not taking taxes away from taxpayers or from the municipalities, but it is capturing, as the value of that starts to go up, it's capturing that and reimbursing the developer for things like building the workforce housing, the infrastructure. They'll be extending the TART trail through that property. So those kind of expenses.
Okay, so it did get, it was 7-1. We had one
7
person
to 1.
not
TJ Andrews was opposed. She had a lot of questions about documentation for it, but yes, a 7-1 vote. So that will now allow Oak Shore Commons to go ahead and finalize some documentation with the state, and then they can start working on building that workforce housing. And I should just note, because we've had so many reader questions about this, I think in part because of some projects in Traverse City that have been promised to be workforce housing and have been changed into market rate condos. It's really important to note that Trailside 45 is an example of that project did not have this kind of funding attached to it. This sort of brownfield funding requires the developer every year to report on the income levels of their tenants. They have to show their rent. They have to show their receipts, essentially.
Yeah.
If they don't show their receipts and they change it over to market rate, units, or they're somehow getting around that agreement, they lose their reimbursement.
Oh.
So there are reporting mechanisms in place. It is required, and it's required for 25 years. So these workforce houses will be there at least for 25 years.
Oh, that's good to know. And also, they have to show receipts not on thermal paper, right?
It's a little nod to our to our friend Tia
They
Joe.
can't just disappear, right? I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, we had one more story in sort of your Grand Traverse County roundup here. The commissioners were supportive of a plan for the Grand Traverse County Jail to continue to send inmates to neighboring jails. Now, this has become common practice in other parts of the state. It's definitely become common practice here in Grand Traverse County when the jail population exceeds the space. We've been talking about the jail for a very long time. Ever since I've been in media, the conversation around whether or not we needed a new jail and conversation around running out of space has always been sort of in the wings.
Yes.
So this was definitely supportive, but the commissioners noted that this is not a long-term solution for what you're seeing is overcrowded jails. So let's talk a little bit about what this means, but
Mhm.
then also if you have any insight into where they may be going to continue this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, this is an agreement. It's sort of Sheriff Mike Shea described it as a handshake agreement. The jails have already been doing this practice of when Grand Traverse County's jail is full, boarding the surplus inmates in neighboring county jails and reimbursing the jails for that. But this sort of formalized it into actual written contracts, which is always
That's
good to
good.
have in
Yeah.
government.
Yeah.
You generally don't want handshake deals in government. So county commissioners did approve that, but you're right, there was discussion around it. I mean, the rate that Grand Traverse County pays, I think seems very reasonable on the surface, is $35 per inmate per day.
Seems very reasonable.
For housing, as we know in our area, that is
Yeah.
quite low. However, TJ Andrews, the vice chair of the commission, pointed out that there are extra costs the county is incurring beyond that $35. There's transportation costs of moving inmates between counties. If they have a medical event in a neighboring jail, there's extra costs affiliated with that. There's also more intangible issues. Like, for example, when you move an inmate to a county that's further away, that makes it hard for their family
Yep.
to visit them.
Mhm.
And they were sensitive to that. They wanted to acknowledge that. We also have to have a place to put an inmate if the jail is
Sure.
full.
Yeah, you can't
So
just say sorry.
it's not something that they want to do. It's something that they have to do because they don't have the space. But it did prompt a conversation. You know, the county is having a lot of conversations about its different buildings and facilities. There's a plan in place right now called Project Alpha to try to build out the Lafreniere campus, expand the 911 center, things like that. But the jail is a big piece of the puzzle that has, as you mentioned, been long discussed in Grand Traverse County. And I think, you know, I certainly have sensed some frustration among multiple sheriffs, not just the current Sheriff Mike Shea, about the need to address this. It's not just the space issue, it's the conditions of
Yep.
the existing facility, wanting them to be better both for inmates and for employees
Right.
who work at the jail. And so I think there will be more conversation about that.
And for staff, I mean, the way that that you monitor people who are incarcerated at this point, whether it's jail or prison, that layout has changed
Yeah.
dramatically because it's hard to continue to get staff, and it's expensive to get staff. So if you have more of it, maybe an open floor plan, so to speak, it's a little easier to monitor that. You know.
Yeah, there's safety issues both
Mhm.
for the inmates again and for employees. It's a lot of things. So no clear answers on
Okay.
that or a timeline, but I do think it's a larger conversation that the commission has some urgency to start having more conversations about.
Absolutely. I think that's really important. And also, it's important to note, too, that when we started having these conversations, well before I was a member of the media, like 25 years ago, um, the population has only increased.
Yeah.
So the
Right.
likelihood that someone is going to jail is then going to increase as well.